So welcome to tonight's Dharma talk. Tonight I'd like to talk about joy and hopefully how we can cultivate it. So according to Paul Ekman, a renowned expert on emotions, joy is a variant of the emotion happiness. And there's lots of ways we can describe happiness in the English language. And here are just a few words: joy, bliss, bubbly, buoyant, contentment. And I'm going through the alphabet here. I can go on for a long time, but I cut some of these words back just so we wouldn't take too much time with our Dharma talk. Delight, ecstatic, euphoria, relief, gladness, glee, happiness, rapture, uplifted, and zeal. They're all words that we can describe joy with, and well, they're all words for happiness. And with psychologists anyway, they consider happiness as a variant of happiness is the emotion, and joy is a variant of that. So positive psychologists see happiness in three ways. The first way is the feeling of enjoyment. It's kind of like a feeling of enjoyment and pleasure, which is hedonic happiness. And it's the happiness that we get from the senses. This happiness we need this type of happiness to live in the world as humans. And this first type of happiness is about what we get from the world. It's the happiness dependent upon what we get. Like when we get enough food, money and sex, we're happy, for example. The second type of happiness they're talking about is the type of happiness that we get when we're completely engaged in something. Like it could be working in the garden, or playing guitar, or getting involved in a project. And this type of happiness is somewhat related to what we're getting from the world, but it's also related to what we're putting into it, like the effort that we're giving to achieve this sort of happiness. So it's not dependent on what we get. And the third type of happiness is the sense of well-being and happiness that arises when we do something that's really meaningful, really important to us. And it could actually be unpleasant, but it gives us a sense of joy, like working to give somebody something, like seeing someone's distressed and giving them something, giving them some nourishment or support, and that gives us happiness. Even though it may be difficult, we might be giving away something. We might be giving away money, for example, but that brings us a certain sense of joy. And it could be the type of joy that we arrive at when we live a good life, a virtuous life. Like there's something called eudaimonia, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. I can't pronounce Greek, but it means genuine happiness, the happiness of a virtuous life, a life where you're giving and having joy from giving. So this type of joy and happiness is about what we give to the world more than what we get. And it's what we contribute to the greater good of the world, of the planet, and those beings living on it. So has been some large research on happiness, and that came to the conclusion that happiness comes from not necessarily getting and having what you want, but wanting what you have. It's a really cool distinction. So, I was thinking on the way up here, I get this lottery thing. I just put into it a long time ago, and it tells me that I can be really happy if I win this $3.5 million home. And, you know, they advertise it like people are really joyous and happy because they've got this home, but they don't talk about all the problems that go with it. Like, you know, the troubles you get from the insurance and all sorts of other things. But anyway, that's what I'm getting at here is the fact that happiness can be considered in many different ways. And what we aim for in Buddhism is this latter type of happiness, the joy that comes from living a good life, a virtuous life. It's something that we can, you know, if you believe in afterlife, it's something that you take with you. It's like the possessions and material things you can't take with you. So in Buddhism, joy is often considered along the same spectrum, similar spectrum as we find in contemporary psychology. However, what happens is that within the language of Buddhist meditation, there's some really subtle distinctions between happiness and joy and other uplifting feelings. So there's a term called piti, and piti refers to rapture. Piti is a Pali term. It refers to the rapture and bubbly, light feelings that arise in our body when we get really concentrated, actually. Sometimes we don't even need to get concentrated. We just need to, well, we are getting concentrated, but we're doing something, we're engaging in something that's really like in the flow. You get this piti. It's this bubbly energetic feeling. Some of you may have felt that when you meditate. It's what we get when we concentrate. And happiness is called sukha in Pali. Oh, sorry, piti refers to joy and rapture. Sukha refers to happiness. And in my experience, happiness is a much kind of more refined experience. Sukha is a different experience. It's more refined than the bubbly, energetic feelings of piti. It's a kind of subtle refinement of it. It's much better than joy in that respect. And I usually feel it in my heart. It's like this lightness in my heart. It's a buoyancy of heart. So there are many ways to cultivate joy. And some ways that I cultivate joy is simply by reflecting on the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, for example, or taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And I explained that before the talk, that the Buddha is the quality of awakening. Traditionally, it's the historical being that woke up 2,600 years ago. Yet, what we take refuge is not a kind of historical being. We're taking refuge in the Buddha within our own heart, really, like the awakened quality that's here. And I take refuge in the Dharma. The Dharma is the way things are, as I explained earlier. And I take refuge in the Sangha. The Sangha, I understand the Sangha as, well, traditionally it's those beings who are on the stages of awakening, beings that have awakened. So we take refuge in that. And I take refuge in the Sangha in the sense of feeling a connection with something beyond the ego, something that is moving towards awakening, a community of fellow practitioners. That gives me great refuge. And it also gives me joy. So that's one way you can cultivate joy. There's other ways we can cultivate joy, and I invited you to this in the meditation before, was simply remembering or bringing something that brings joy to our heart. Like remembering something or a quality or an event or a person that simply sparkles and kindles joy. I think of the term awe. I think I'm hearing that term more and more these days. Awe, like we can just look at the awe of nature. Somebody was talking to me the other day, and they were talking about, I felt the joy of looking at bees. Like this person was talking about bees and how they were doing their dances, and it was just awesome to hear that. And I'm sure the person who was telling me that would feel that awe. So there's just bringing to mind those sorts of things. Other ways of cultivating joy is by what we call mudita. Mudita is, sometimes it's called appreciative joy, sometimes it's called empathetic joy, sometimes it's called sympathetic joy, sometimes it's called altruistic joy. It's usually referred to sympathetic joy and empathetic joy in the traditions. And in that respect, you tune into another's joy. You're celebrating in the joy and the good fortune and the skills and the virtues of another being. So you're empathizing with that being. And that's truly a way of appreciating, developing joy. And I remember I was at a Happiness and Its Causes conference one time, and I saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama walk on the stage, and everyone stood up, everyone put their hands in Anjali like this, and I looked around and everyone was smiling. And I was smiling too. And it wasn't that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was down there on the stage kind of radiating, looking at the 5,000 people in the audience and saying, oh, there's Malcolm, I'll send him some joy. He wasn't doing that. We were empathizing with his joy. So that's a really cool way of cultivating joy, because often joy arises from our own efforts. And in this case, all we're doing is tuning in, empathizing with another person's joy. And when I was on a retreat a couple of years ago, I was retreating at home actually, and there was a lot of activity around me. People were building roads and all sorts of things. There was athletics competitions across the river. It was very noisy, and there was aeroplanes as well. And the way it started when I was doing my mudita practice, I would just reflect on my partner. Some of you know my partner. She's such an ethical being. She's really so virtuous, and she works with children, and she's so helpful with the children. I just reflect on her and really appreciate that ethics and her sincerity, and that reflection on her qualities brings joy to my heart. So that's another way of cultivating joy. Traditionally the Buddhism sort of goes into, talks about it as empathetic joy and sympathetic joy, but I would prefer to call it appreciative joy, because when you consider that there's no difference between a self and another, we're all in it together, and you think of non-duality, when there's joy, there's just joy. There's no owner of it. So in this respect, we can have appreciation of our own good deeds and virtues and qualities and actions and so on. So there's this appreciative joy. And it's not big-noting oneself, it's being honest and sort of soaking up the joy that's available. I went on a course once with Rick Hansen, and it was a course on positive neuroplasticity. So positive neuroplasticity is about recognizing the good and not getting caught up in the unwholesome, so not getting caught up in negative bias. So rather than getting caught up in negative bias, we pay attention to what's good happening in our lives. We pay attention to the beautiful things, the good things, rather than kind of being obsessed with everything that's going wrong. So I know Rick from other times, and I saw he was working really hard, and I said, "Oh, Rick, would you like a massage?" I used to be a professional masseuse. I used to be a professional shiatsu therapist. Would you like one? I can give you one. I know you're working really hard. And he said, "Oh, that'd be great." So later on the day, I was going in the elevator up into his room to give him a massage. And he said to me, "Malcolm, you're a kind person. You're a kind person." And I fobbed it off. I said, "Well, yeah, no, it's all right. It's all right. I'm not don't worry about it. It's all right." And he said, "Look at what you're doing, Malcolm. You're a kind person. Breathe it in." And he was pointing out the very thing we were learning on this training, the fact that often we get caught up in negative bias about seeing how bad we are, how wrong everything is, and how everything's not going our way, or we're just failures and so on, and we fail to see what's going right. Negative bias had a value back in evolution, but in modernity, it doesn't have a value much anymore, and just gets us caught up in anxiety and depression. So there's more ways of cultivating joy, and I think I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned piety and sukha. These two terms, piety, joy or rapture, sukha, happiness, are two factors of the 5 factors of jhana. Now, jhana is a highly concentrated, refined state of mind. It's an altered state of consciousness. It's where we become completely absorbed in an object, and we cultivate samadhi, which is concentration. Another way of describing this is concentration. And we experience all the states of consciousness, basically. They're very refined, and the factors of jhana include initial application, which is putting your attention somewhere; sustained application, which is staying with it. The third one is piety. When you stay with something, like say if you're staying with the breath, being mindful of the breath, more than mindful of the breath, you're focusing on the breath at the nose tip. You're staying with it, you're staying with it, you stay with it. Your mind slips off, it comes back, your mind slips off, it comes back. And you stay with it. What will result will be piety. You have this rapturous joy arising. So that's another way of cultivating joy. From that, the other factors, by the way, are sukha. You have this piety arising, and then there's a more refined sukha, which is this light-hearted contentment, just smiling heart. And then the other factor is a unification of attention. Sometimes it's called one-pointedness, but I like to think about it as unification of mind, like all one's mental energies are going in the one direction. So that's another way of cultivating joy. And in the Abhidharma is a text, a Buddhist text. It's got lots of lists, and it's quite technical. And they create lists for how you can cultivate joy. So, and the lists include contemplating the positive aspects of being free from dukkha. Dukkha is suffering, for those who don't know. Suffering or discontent or, unsatisfactoriness, that's a better way of describing it. Suffering's a bit gross, but it does explain it. Unsatisfactoriness is a better way of explaining dukkha. So when we can contemplate the positive aspects of being free from dukkha, that gives us joy. Acting with and remembering personal actions that have been in accordance with ethical values, living the good life, living a good life, a virtuous life, and remembering it. They say at the time of death it's useful to think about how ethical, the things we've done well in life. Recalling acts of generosity and giving dana. And dana here means generosity. As a verb it means giving, and as a noun it means the object that you give. Like you can give dana. I'm giving dana. I'm giving dana right now. The object is a Dharma talk. So reflecting on the nature of peacefulness. Avoiding the company of aggressive, angry and insensitive people. Having friendships with warm, loving, refined, wise people. reflecting on and hearing about how we can abandon dukkha and the causes of dukkha. Inclining the mind and committing oneself to the development of joy. And developing meditative concentration. I just told you about how the factors of jhana arise. The factors of jhana, initial application, sustained application, joy, happiness, and unification of mind is all ways we can cultivate this joy. And having appreciation and gratitude for life and others, and even oneself, are other ways of cultivating joy. So I could say a lot more, but I think that's probably enough for the moment. I trust the Dharma talk was helpful, and perhaps I wish you joy. I wish you the cultivation of joy and its causes. Thank you.